It was just another quiet morning at the bank. The kind of morning where nothing exciting ever happened. The employees moved like machines, working in perfect sync with the ticking of the clock. The hum of voices filled the air as people sat at their desks, their fingers tapping away at keyboards, their eyes fixed on the monitors in front of them. Business as usual. Then the door swung open with an unexpected creak, pulling everyone's attention towards it. The clink of the bell above the door sounded too loud in the stillness. An old man shuffled inside, his clothes ragged, his shoes worn down to the soles. In his hands, he clutched a large crumpled sack, as if it held something precious. The bank lobby was silent for a moment as the man took slow, deliberate steps toward the counter, his head slightly bent, eyes focused on the ground. People glanced up at him briefly, but their attention quickly returned to their own affairs. He was just another homeless man, they thought, probably here to ask for spare change. But then, with a voice stronger than anyone could have expected, he spoke. "I'm here to claim what's mine," he said, his voice echoing through the quiet room. His tone was calm, but there was a hidden power behind his words, one that immediately caught the attention of the bank's staff. Claire, the receptionist, looked up in confusion, raising an eyebrow. "Sorry, sir?" she asked. The old man's gaze sharpened as he lifted his head and looked directly at her, his eyes filled with determination. "The money in this bank, it's mine," he repeated. His voice was steady, unwavering, as though he were making an undeniable fact. Richard, the bank manager, overheard and walked over with a polite but condescending smile. "Sir, if you're here for a withdrawal, we'll need your account details," he said, trying to steer the situation in the right direction. "You can't just walk in here and claim—" "I'm not here for a withdrawal," the old man interrupted, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm here to take back what's mine." A pause. The room seemed to hold its breath. Claire exchanged a nervous glance with Richard, unsure of what to do next. She'd never encountered a customer like this before. Richard's smile faltered, but he maintained his composure. He wasn't going to let an old man disrupt the orderly operations of the bank. "Sir, if you're in the wrong place, we can—" "I'm not in the wrong place," the man cut him off again, his voice firm. "I've come to claim ownership of this bank." Richard raised an eyebrow and glanced at Claire, who looked equally confused. Was this some kind of joke? An old man wandering into a bank and claiming ownership? Ridiculous. But something about the man's presence, something about the way he spoke made them both hesitate. "Okay," Richard said slowly, his smile returning as he tried to diffuse the tension. "Let's get this straight. You're saying you own this bank?" "I am the owner," the man replied without flinching. "You've been holding it for me for years." Richard's expression changed. He laughed, softly at first, but then louder. "I think we're going to need to call security," he said, turning to Claire, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. But before anyone could move, the old man reached into the sack he was carrying and pulled out a stack of yellowed papers. He laid them on the counter, one by one, each sheet crinkling slightly as it was set down. "What is this?" Richard asked, trying to hide his amusement. "These," the man said, "are deeds. To every dollar you've taken, to every investment you've made with my money." The words hit Richard like a punch. He stared at the papers, his smile faltering. These weren't ordinary pieces of paper. They looked ancient, worn, and important. Richard quickly glanced around the room, but no one else was paying attention. The rest of the staff were still absorbed in their tasks, oblivious to the dramatic turn unfolding before them. "You're saying these papers are deeds to this bank?" Richard asked, his voice suddenly much less confident. The old man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he let the silence stretch, as if allowing the weight of his words to settle. Then, after a long moment, he spoke again. "I built this bank," he said simply. "This is mine. It always has been, until the day they erased me." Richard stared at him in disbelief. "Erased you? What are you talking about?" The old man looked Richard dead in the eye, his gaze unwavering. "My name was Albert Peterson. I was the founder of this bank. You've been taking my money for years." The words hung in the air. The world around Richard seemed to tilt, the walls of the bank suddenly feeling smaller. How could this be possible? Richard's mind raced. The name Albert Peterson was vaguely familiar. but he couldn't place it. And the documents in front of him, they certainly weren't something he had ever seen before. Could this old man be telling the truth? Richard stood frozen. His gaze flickered back to the yellowed papers spread across the counter. Albert Peterson's words echoed in his mind like an insistent drum beat. I built it with my own hands, with my own money. He'd heard of legends, of wealthy founders whose fortunes had vanished, of men who disappeared from history as if they were mere myths. But this wasn't a myth. This was Albert Peterson, a name suddenly bringing clarity and confusion at the same time. I don't understand, Richard stammered, his voice shaking. You built this bank? How? Albert Peterson stood motionless, his eyes unwavering, as if he had long since accepted the truth that Richard was struggling to comprehend. It wasn't just about money, Richard. It was about trust. It was about vision. I trusted the wrong people, and they took it all from me. Richard's mind raced as he tried to piece together the details. It didn't make sense. How had someone like this, someone who appeared so ordinary, so frail, once been the heart of a massive financial empire? Was this some elaborate con, or was the truth far darker than he was willing to accept? Albert continued, his voice growing more intense with each word. You see, when you're at the top, they don't let you stay there unless you know how to manipulate everything around you. I built this bank on the backs of real people. I saw what it could become, but they took my empire and erased me from it, made sure I didn't exist. But here I am. The room was silent, the hum of the air conditioning the only sound breaking the stillness. Claire, still holding her phone, stared at the papers, her expression one of disbelief. She had heard of shady financial dealings, corruption, but never anything like this. Richard could feel the sweat on his brow as he looked from Albert to the stack of documents. How could this be real? How could a man walk in here, claim to be the true owner of the entire bank, and have documents that seemed to verify it? Albert Peterson wasn't done. He reached for the sack at his side and pulled out another set of documents. These, he said, are the original contracts, the agreements that formed the foundation of this bank, and they're signed by the men who were supposed to protect me. But they sold me out, Richard. Sold me for power, for money. And when I became a problem, they discarded me. The papers trembled in Albert's hands as he laid them down, each sheet marked with signatures and dates. Dates long before Richard's time. He stared at them, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Richard was a man of facts. He needed answers. This couldn't just be a coincidence. The man had the documents, and yet there had to be more to the story. A voice inside him screamed for clarity, for proof. If you really are the owner of this bank, Richard began slowly, trying to maintain some semblance of control, then why didn't you come back sooner? Why now? What are you trying to do? Albert's eyes locked onto his, piercing and intense. I've been waiting for the right moment, for the truth to come out. Do you think I didn't know what they did to me? That I wasn't watching from the shadows, waiting for the moment I could reclaim my legacy? My life wasn't over just because they erased my name from the records. Richard's mind spun. Every word Albert said felt like an unraveling thread. And the more he heard, the more the story didn't add up. The story of the founding of the bank, the story of betrayal, it all sounded too far-fetched. And yet here was the evidence, right in front of him. But just as Richard was about to ask more, Claire's voice broke through the tension. Richard, she whispered, eyes wide. I've been looking through the records. I found something. There's a file under the name Peterson. It's been archived for years. No one ever mentioned it before. Richard turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. What do you mean, archived? Claire pointed to the terminal. It's not just a file. It's a record of transactions, withdrawals, and transfers. All of them are tied to someone named Albert Peterson, but there's no clear explanation. It's like his identity was erased from the system. Albert's eyes lit up with a glimmer of recognition. Of course they erased me. They covered their tracks. But they didn't think I'd survive. They didn't think I'd come back for what was mine. The realization hit Richard like a thunderclap. Albert Peterson had been right. The bank's system, its foundation, its very essence, was built on his name, his money, and someone had deliberately erased him from it. Richard had always thought the story of the bank's rise was a simple one, a group of investors, hard work, and sheer will. But this was a conspiracy, a deliberate attempt to erase one man's legacy. "What do you want, Peterson?" Richard asked, the final question hanging in the air like smoke. "What do you expect us to do? This is a multi-billion,